matters to me and why. This is the second in the series, and our goal is to have next fall probably 2 additional ones. Just a little bit of context for this sort of forum. This is exactly the kind of audience we look for this forum. An intimate crowd, where particularly for very busy people, you can take an hour of your time to just catch your breath and have an opportunity to engage with members of our community. And often people ask me, well, what is this about? And I often end up saying to them, really, we want to talk about what are some of our values and our belief systems and what motivates us to do what we do. So that's really the spirit of what matters to me and why. This series actually exists on several other campuses, so it's good to borrow from others when they have very good ideas, and we do that shamelessly, especially when they're great ideas. And we're privileged today to have a very good colleague, Jess Waters, who accepted to be our second speakers. And generally, the way we identify speakers for this is we talk to community members and say, who's someone you want to hear about? You know, who's someone you want to learn more about? Maybe you think you know them, but maybe you really don't know them as much. You know their titles, you know a little bit about them in meetings, but what would it be like for you to be able to engage them and to learn more about who they are and what motivates them to do what they do? And so we had heard from a couple of folks that Jess would be the right person for this. And thanks to Jen, who really has done all of the legwork to make this happen. And I'm so grateful for her for all of the work that she's doing with this. And so Jess said yes, she's willing to do that. So thank you for accepting. I'm going to briefly introduce her, and then we're going to get started. And the format is she'll talk a little bit about an area of interest for her, and then we wanted to open it up to discussion, to questions, and really have you engage with her in a conversation. So that's the format. And so without further ado, let me introduce her to you. Jess Waters, I think you all know her as the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in American University School of Public Affairs. But she's also a faculty member in the Department of Justice, Law, and Criminology, and is an adjunct faculty member at the Washington College of Law. Talk about someone who doesn't have enough on the plate. Her research focuses primarily on reproductive rights law. Her recent work has explored questions related to the legal impact of women's medical decisions during pregnancy and childbirth, employment-based conscience protection for reproductive health care providers, and the reproductive rights of employees working for religiously affiliated employers. She is a prolific writer. Her work has been published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Gender, the American University Journal of Gender, Social Policy and the Law, the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism, and the Stanford Journal of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. I often ask, where do you find the time? Prior to joining the AU faculty, she taught as an adjunct professor at the Washington College of Law and also was a litigator at WilmerHale, where she specialized in criminal defense litigation, internal investigations, and reproductive rights litigation and advocacy. She also clerked for the Honorable Emmett Sullivan on the DC Court. So she's been a very busy person and worked at a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting access to reproductive health care. And so please welcome Jess Waters, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks. So I'm not actually talking about any of those things. Yeah. So, right, that's sort of the point, right? So when Jen approached me about giving this talk, I immediately said yes, because I'll say yes to anything Jen asks. But you know, I was terrible because for like 2 weeks, she kept saying, what's your topic? What's your topic? I don't know what my topic is. And I was like, well, I could do something really academic, you know, because I thought that's comfortable, right? I'm pretty good at giving a talk on law, pretty good at giving a talk on reproductive rights. And she should have nudged me a little and said, well, maybe that's not exactly what we're looking for. And it's like, you want me to talk about my feelings, don't you? You know? That is not a space that is generally super comfortable for me. So I was thinking about it and thinking about the work we've been doing here over the past couple of years and how we've really tried to, with our undergraduates in particular, change our messaging, right? And talk to them not about just how many internships can you get, how many jobs can you get straight A's, can you have 6 majors and save a small country before you graduate? And we've started talking about breathing, right? And we've started talking about taking your time and making mistakes and being okay with falling down and figuring it out. And I've been thinking a lot about that because this is the speech I give to a lot of our freshmen. And inside I was thinking, yeah, but I'm not so good at that, right? So I've been thinking a lot about imperfection. And so the title of this talk is Embracing Imperfection. And I have to say, when I told people in my life that I was giving this talk, their reactions went something like this. I told my husband, and he was drinking a glass of water at the time, and he spit it out, and he said, "Have they met you?" And I said, "Okay, fine, fine, fine." And then I told my best friend, and he also laughed, and he said, "Why did they ask you?" I said, "Thanks, thank you, I appreciate this." I told my running partner just yesterday morning, and we get up and we run at 6:15 in the morning because we're great at embracing imperfection. And she looks at me and she's cut from the same cloth as me. And I said, "Well, I'm giving a talk on embracing imperfection." And she said, "Ew, why?" I said, "That's sort of how I'm feeling." And then another person said to me, "Embracing imperfection? Well, yeah, you're a working mom." I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's sort of interesting, right?" So I had these really, people had strong reactions to the fact that I was giving this talk. So suffice to say that this thing that matters to me, this embracing imperfection, is not something I am expert in or have figured out, but it's something that I think is important, and it's something that I'm working on. And I think those things that you're working on tend to be the important things. So that's how I landed here. And I'll say that giving this talk is actually a little terrifying for me, because let's face it, we all want others to think that we have it figured out, right? We want other people to think that we're perfect, that we have things under control, that we don't need help, right? And frankly, we get gold stars for doing that. And I am really good at collecting gold stars, right? I always have been, and gold stars are it's National Honor Society, right? It's summa cum laude. It's going to law school. It's getting the first job, getting the next job, getting the promotion, getting the award. And I've figured out how to do that in a lot of circumstances. But it turns out that some of that work that we do is this really sanitized version of work, and this really sanitized version of striving for something. There's an author, Anna Quindlen, I'm sure a lot of you know her, and she gave this commencement speech at Mount Holyoke years ago, but I've always loved it. And in her speech, she talks about herself on the first day of college. And she says this: "I cannot remember what she wore or how she felt that day, but I can tell you this about her. She was perfect. And let me be very clear what I mean by that. I mean that I got up every day and I tried to be perfect in every possible way. If there was a test to be had, I had studied for it. If there was a paper to be written, it was done. I smiled at everyone in the dorm hallways because it was important to be friendly. And then I made fun of them behind their backs because it was important to be witty." And I read this and I thought, how did you get in my head, right? But here's the rub. It's kind of the easy way out, right? And she goes on to say this. Because those gold stars, right, those things you can point to easily, they're identifiable, everyone else can see them, you can put them on your resume, it can be very public and again, very sanitized. And it's really easy once you start collecting those gold stars to just keep trying to get more, right, because it's satisfying. But she goes on to say in this same speech that, quote, "Eventually being perfect day after day, year after year, became like always carrying a backpack filled with bricks on my back. And oh, how I secretly longed to lay my burden down. Trying to be perfect may be sort of inevitable for people like us." And this is these people in this room, I think, right? "Who are smart and ambitious and interested in the world and its good opinion of us. But at one level, it's too hard, and at another, it's too cheap and easy. Because it really requires you mainly to read the zeitgeist of whatever and wherever you happen to be and assume the mask necessary to be whatever it dictates or requires. Those requirements shapeshift, sure, but when you're clever, you can read them and do the imitation required." And I read that and I thought that's what it comes down to, because when your goal is perfection, or sort of more accurately, the illusion of perfection, what we're talking about is imitation. And what we're talking about is the easy way out. And I started thinking, why do we fear being imperfect, right? Why do I fear being imperfect? Because that's certainly not the standard I hold anyone else to, right? When I think about the narrative in my head and the self-critiques in my head, I would never hold Marianne to that standard. I would never hold Jane to that standard, right? If they were being hard on themselves, I would say, "You're being too hard on yourself. You're being ridiculous," right? But we don't allow ourselves that same luxury. And I think part of it is because we want to present ourselves in a certain way, and we want to protect ourselves, right? We want to protect ourselves from rejection, real or imagined. It's easier and it's cleaner and it's safer to present an image that you have it figured out. And to present an image that there isn't uncertainty, that you're not grappling with uncertainty in some way. As all good scholars do, when I was preparing for this talk, I thought, all right, imperfection, I can write about that because I'm going to research the shit out of it, right? so that's what I did. And when you start like Googling imperfection and vulnerability, you find yourself in a TED Talk hole, right? So I watched a lot of TED Talks over the past couple of weeks. And I'm sure some of you have heard of Brené Brown, who writes on vulnerability, and I found myself watching a lot of hers. And she talks a lot about perfectionism. And she says it's a way of looking at the world that says, quote, if I look perfect, live perfect, act perfect, and do it all perfectly, I can avoid or minimize shame, blame, criticism, or judgment. So perfectionism isn't about striving to be our best, but actually about protecting ourselves. And I think that's right? I think it's this fear of messiness, and it's this idea of trying to protect yourself. We try to protect ourselves because we don't want to ask for help. We don't want to need help. We don't want to ask for help and be rejected. And we don't want to feel like we are vulnerable. We don't want to feel like we are weak. But I started thinking about the times that I have felt most connected to other people. And I'm betting for most of you it's the same. It's not the times when you're getting the award or the gold star. I mean, it's wonderful to celebrate accomplishments with family and friends, don't get me wrong. But that's not the time when you're most connected. I think that the deepest places of connection are when you let your guard down, right? And whether that is like leaping without a net into some new experience, whether it's asking for help, maybe it's those times, and we've all had them, when you lay on the floor crying, right? You have a broken heart, or you've had a loss in some way. You've had some sort of failure, right? Those are the times when you accept that help, that you have that connection. And it's those messy places and those complicated places and those confusing places that feel so terrible that get you to someplace new, because it's usually because someone has helped to pick you up, right? And it's usually because you took a chance. So I thought about kind of ending that talk there, and then I thought, okay, that's sort of the easy way out. I should probably talk about some times when I've done these things. And I'll talk about a few. One for me, so for the taking chances. One was actually leaving my job as a litigator, because I had for 27 years, I had gone through high school and undergrad and law school, and I got this job at this amazing law firm, and I was about to make partner, and all the money that comes along with it and all the prestige that comes along with it, and it was the next gold star, right? Making partner was the next gold star, and it was pretty clear it was going to happen, right? And I was teaching at WCL for one night a week as an adjunct, and I just loved it. And I remember going home and saying to my husband, like, I'm kind of thinking about like leaving the law firm. And he was like, you're doing what? What are you doing? Because we had just had our first child. He had just started his own business. So I was the breadwinner. And he said, okay. And then this opening came at AU, and it was for a 9-month term faculty position. And those of you in this room know that there is no security in those 9-month term faculty positions. And I remember being on the phone with then Dean Leogrand of the School of Public Affairs, and him offering me this job, and he told me the salary, and I said, say what, right? But I did it, and I took the leap. And it was one of the most terrifying things I had ever done, right? Because I was leaving something that I was really good at, and I knew I would continue to be good at. And I had no idea if I would be good at this next venture. And I was pretty sure I was going to be broke. And the combo of that, taking that leap was incredibly terrifying, but it was also one of the best things I'd ever done, right? And I ended up getting support from unlikely places, right? And people who, I feared at that time letting people down, right? The people who had mentored me through the law firm, who were counting on me doing those things, I was worried about letting my family down. And it turned out people just supported me, right? And that fear was in my head, right? It wasn't what they were putting on me, it was what I was putting on myself. Another thing, and this is sort of deeply personal, as most of you know, I lost my dad 2 months ago, and I was very close to my dad. And it actually, he actually passed away the day before I was scheduled to interview for the VPUG position. So I had to call the search committee and say, I can't do it, this is what happened. And I hadn't even told anyone my dad was sick for the most part, right? And it all sort of happened very quickly. And so the fact that I had lost my dad became sort of a university-wide known fact, right? And to me, that was excruciating because that wasn't something, I don't do that, right? I don't share my personal stuff at work. But it was so amazing in so many ways because people that I barely knew from across campus were offering incredible support and incredible kindness and sharing their stories of losing parents or losing family members. So I was sort of forced into this position of public vulnerability, right? I didn't go there willingly, but it really was sort of life-changing for me to be able to, rely on friends and colleagues and family in that way. The other thing that I think is really important about all this is we talk a lot about empathy and having empathy for our students and our colleagues. But you can't actually have empathy if you're not showing people something of yourself, right? You can have sympathy, but you can't have empathy. I'm not suggesting that we start baring our souls to our students. In fact, I would suggest that we not do that too often, right? My lawyer hat goes on. But, we can't, you can't have true empathy unless you are also sharing a part of yourself. And I think you also can't get anywhere close to perfection or joy or true happiness unless you're experiencing these other things. So Brown, who I am stealing liberally from here, talks about vulnerability. And she says, you can't numb those hard feelings. And she's talking about that fear of rejection and that fear of loneliness in some way. You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the others. You can't be selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy, we numb gratitude, and we numb happiness. And then when we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning, and then we feel vulnerable, so then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin, which I thought was pretty great. But she talks about in her research, she's actually studied shame and vulnerability and gives talks all over the country on these things. She says that people who have sort of figured this out in some way were those who were willing to take the big chances. And she talks about the people who were willing to, she says, to say, I love you first. The willing to go someplace where there are no guarantees. The willingness to invest in a relationship that might not work out. The willingness to take that new job that might not work out. And I was thinking about, remember that movie, Say Anything, from the 80s, right? Yeah, so yeah, you probably all remember this. And John Cusack stands outside the window with the, what are they called? Boombox, right? Boombox. And he plays the song for the girl. And one of my thoughts is like, if a woman did that, that would be stalking. But that's a whole different talk, right? But it's a show of vulnerability, right? It's a show of being willing to be imperfect for something greater, right? And we think about those things with like love and relationships, but I think we can also think about it in terms of our interactions with students and colleagues and how we teach and the expectations that we set for our students going forward. So I'll wrap it up with one more quote. So Anna Quindlen in that same speech at the end says, nothing important or meaningful or beautiful or interesting or great ever came out of imitations, because the thing that is really hard and really amazing is giving up on being perfect and beginning the work of becoming yourself. And I think that's it, right? I think it's this idea of accepting yourself as imperfect, allowing others to see you as imperfect, so that you can actually be yourself. So those are my meager thoughts on the issue, and I'd love to talk, see what you have to think.
Presented with quite a few provocative thoughts here. Reactions, comments, reflections, perspective, questions.
Well, I just have to say that I when we were talking and I found out what your topic was.
Yeah.
I actually also was researching Brene Brown.
Oh, how funny.
I got you this book because I couldn't help but think it was exactly like what you might be talking about.
Yeah.
And so I will give this to you, but
That's
I
funny.
was just cracking up. And
That's
Marion
funny.
and I actually, for our Mindful Mondays, have been watching those same TED Talks.
They're
that we
amazing,
watched
right?
this
Yeah,
whole week.
yeah, yeah.
So as you were quoting it, I was like, she's going to say banana, no muffin.
And it did,
We're
yeah.
all the same.
All right, good,
But the
good.
vulnerability talk is wonderful.
It's
and
fantastic.
It's so important for
Yeah.
everyone here to think about. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all
Well, especially like in a room full of like really high achievers, right? Yes, yeah. Yeah, Jane.
So thank you, that was great. In bringing it back to where you started is sort of like with our students. Something that I'm trying, speaking of high achieving people, right?
Yeah.
Or at least for the students that I work with in the Community-Based Research Scholars Program, they're awesome, but many of them have that sort of
Oh, yeah.
need to be like perfect.
Yep.
And it stresses me out,
Yep.
even though I have that gene or whatever as well. So I guess what are your thoughts about, as a professor, how to support the students? I'm giving them a grade. Like I want them to do things right and like dot all their I's and cross all their T's,
Yep.
but like do it in a sort of kind, I don't know, supportive way. How do we help them as professors when we're actually expecting them to do things perfectly, but
We are,
don't
right.
want to feed into
Right.
this sort of lack of embracing imperfection?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, and that's part of the rub, right? Is that we want to tell people to work hard and do your best and succeed. I think what I've been trying to do with my own students is talk with them a lot about this being one aspect of their lives, right? And the fact that you earned a B on my paper says nothing about your worth as a human being. It says something about how you wrote this paper at 2 a.m, right? So I've been trying to do a lot of that. I've also, I'm sure we all have these students in our office who come in and say, God, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And I do a lot of saying, like, neither do I, and that seems to resonate because I think we don't realize how much they look up to us and think that we have it figured out, right? I mean, think back to your professors in college, right? You thought that they knew everything, right? And they see us that way, and it's mind-boggling to me. But I think it's, letting them see some of that. And I think there's a line there because I think we have to be careful about oversharing with our students. I don't think that's something we should be doing. But I think it's letting them know that you too have made mistakes and took chances. But I do think it's this idea of there are so many aspects to you, and the grade on this paper is 1/1000th of you, if that, right? And that seems to help a bit, right? And because I think they do see grades as reflections of who they are as people, and reflections of, or sort of indicators of their future life success, rather than what it is.
Right. And also like emphasizing that mistakes are how you learn and like
Yeah.
part of the process. When we were going out to the communities,
Right.
students were like, I'm so stressed out. What if I mess it up? And I'm
Right.
like, great.
Right.
That's what we're here to do.
Right.
Like they know your students. They know
Right.
that you're not PhD level researchers or whatever.
Or even if you are, right? You still
Right,
get to
that's
mess
true.
up.
I
Yeah.
mess up all the time.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
What role do you think the really terrible emotion of feeling pitied plays into this? That I think people actually look up to people who are authentic and say,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do in this situation.
Yeah.
Help me with this. But I know for myself, I think the worst thing for me to feel would be that someone would pity me. So,
Oh, it's terrible.
right. So how do you embrace your imperfection but make sure that you're not pitied? Or how do you show someone empathy without showing them pity?
You think I have the answer to this? I'm a lawyer. I don't have the answer, but I can tell you I know exactly what you're talking about, right? Because that like with my dad and everyone knowing, it was the last thing I wanted, right? And I remember being, in the ICU, and we were there for a long time, and I kept like trying to make everyone in the ICU laugh, right? I kept being, I am the funniest person in the ICU, And it was because I didn't want to actually have to be pitied in some way, right? So I think we have these defense mechanisms that we put up, and humor tends to be one of mine. So I don't know. I really don't know. I'd be interested in thoughts from other people about how to do that. Yeah.
I wanted to respond to your point about the grades.
Yeah.
Because it made me think, my dad was an art teacher for 35 years, and he never handed out a single 100 his entire time teaching
Yeah.
middle school art.
Right.
And as a kid, he told me, he's like, because art is never perfect. Like, that was
Yeah.
the thing he always said.
Yeah.
But I was thinking in terms of, in the classroom, that the grades are a problem, but culturally as an institution, we seem to be drawing a lot of the perfection-seeking students. So how do
Yeah.
we, as a university, create a culture
Yeah.
that allows them to explore,
Yeah.
their brokenness and their imperfection, and also, I'm a Methodist chaplain, so pity is not the worst thing that people could, Jesus pitied a lot of people. Like that was
It's the worst thing for me.
Right, so
Yes.
right,
Yes.
for us,
Yeah.
right? So, but I think it's all part of the same. You have to acknowledge how broken you are in order to be able to be comfortable with that, and I
Right.
think we resisted that we are pitiable. Like seems shameful, but at the same time, it also on some level is inevitable. I mean,
It's like
there's
below being imperfect.
right. But,
Yeah.
but the thing is, there are things I'm pitiable about.
Right.
Like there are things that are really broken with me, and that I need to come to terms with that. But so how? I guess my bigger question is, institutionally speaking, outside of the classroom and our speeches to the students about this 95 won't be the death of you.
Right. Right.
Where, how do we as a campus community reflect on the ways that we can encourage people to
Make mistakes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
make
No,
mistakes.
yeah. I think there's a lot we can do, and I think it starts from sort of admissions and recruiting on forward, right? People have heard me rail against this, but what we feature is the headless wonks with 7 internships, right? And there's some of that is great, right? Students come here because of that. I understand this, but when students, when that is the image they see, they come in thinking they've already failed in some way, right? I'm not living up to that expectation. And particularly when we're thinking about our new student body and how different our new student body looks now, right? Who haven't had the same opportunities and haven't had the same experiences. I think it can be really damaging from day one.
And can't do 7 unpaid internships.
Right, it's not possible for them to do that, right? So I think it's changing some of the messaging from day one. I think it's how we interact with each other. I think it's how we present ourselves to, they see us, right? They see how we present ourselves to our colleagues and how we treat faculty, how we treat staff. So I think it's modeling some of that. I think it's being willing to give talks that aren't academic. I mean, I did not want to do this. And I thought, all right, I need to walk the talk, right? I need to be able to say, there are these other things that are really important that you should be learning here. I thought there'd be more students, but there are other things to learn besides that test that you might get 100 on or not, right? So again, I don't have answers, but I think those are some of the ways we can begin.
Yeah, I guess I noticed that same thing about they come in with the expectation that they're already behind.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had students come into my office and say, it was first semester freshman year.
Oh, yeah.
Despondent that they haven't figured out what they're going to do with the rest of their
All the
life.
time.
You know,
All the time. Yeah.
And that shocks me, only because maybe
Yeah.
I didn't go to as good a college as this, so maybe we just had given up earlier or something.
Yeah.
But the idea that we even thought we were supposed to have that all worked out seemed new to me.
And then they're not learning, right? Because then they're just trying to get an A on the intended major that they declared at 17 or 18 years old, right? And and I will say to them point blank, if you are a 17 or 18-year-old who comes into my office and tells me that you have the next 20 years of your life figured out, you may be psychotic, right? And I will say that to them. I will say, it terrifies me if you were 18 and know the course that your life is going to take, because you're either crazy or you're about to miss out on a whole lot of life, right? And I think it's telling them too about the times that you've made changes, big changes, because that doesn't occur to them, right? That they can make big changes, and they could come in as an intended poli-sci major and take a biology course and fall in love, and it's okay to make that change, right? So I think it's allowing them experimentation, which will lead to mistakes, and then letting them know that when they make inevitable mistakes, we'll be there to help. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention similarly, I'm the undergraduate advisor in the Department of Sociology, and I had a student recently, it's a great story, who came to me and said, I thought I had my whole life worked out, and then I discovered West Africa. She had gone abroad, and she was despondent because she had a plan, and now she had a new passion, and it didn't fit in her plan. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how that could actually be her new plan.
Yeah.
But I did want to say, and not this is the answer to everything, but there is a lot of intentional programming that's happening with RISE, with this new AUX curriculum, which we're piloting in the fall of 16, and hopefully will roll out to everybody by the fall of 18. And in that curriculum, we have lots of stories about happenstance theory, about things I did wrong from faculty, from staff, and especially from students, you know, saying, and so far the greatest gift I've gotten is Gihan in the Career Center, who's going to be doing a presentation on, we don't even want to see you the freshman year. You know, and really a statement of, this is what, you should have a resume by the end of your first year. Come and figure out where we are on campus, but this is what we're discouraging you from. So I do think some of it is that in the office mentoring, but hopefully we'll also be doing some intentional programming that leads students as well.
Yeah, walking the talk,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, and like getting them to a point where like when the student comes into your office and is despondent that she discovered West Africa, like why is that not a moment of celebration, right? How do we get them to switch their mindsets? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that for some students, I realized that things have changed from like when many of us were in undergrad. That going to grad or law school is an expectation in a way that it didn't used to be, and so undergrad is a means to an end. So those A's on that transcript do matter because it's all about where you're going to be able to get into school for that next thing. But I've been trying to focus the students on like enjoy the moment while you're here. And it's going to be okay. I mean, the Humanities Lab just hosted Jay Melder, who's the chief of staff for the DC Department of Human Services. He has an MFA in poetry from me, and he's
Right.
it's all going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but we have to believe it too, right? I mean, that's we can be really good at giving them the talk on that, but I don't know, we have to internalize it in some way, and I don't have the answer to that either. We have a lot of questions.
I'm going to introduce just a reflection by saying that the most tears in my office have taken place in the context of this scenario. AU students are driven. They are high achievers. They are want to leave their imprint on the world and leave a world that is more whole, complete, gentle, just. Now, what I'm interested in is what drives that. And in many instances, it's a sense of obligation. In some ways, kind of noblesse oblige. They do feel privileged. It is duty. And so when I start to have these conversations, I try to get at what is really driving them. And what is driving them is they are straining to respond to their better angels. So as the conversation unfolds, if I can help them realize that the foundational motivation that is animating their lives is, if you will, I would say love. I mean, it is love of neighbor. It is concern for neighbor. It is compassion for neighbor that rests at the core of what their motivations are. And if they recognize that they have the capacity to love neighbor, that can be a real moment of change. And and I find they're just stunned when they recognize, yes, I love my neighbor. I'm concerned about a broken world. And that's kind of when the tears come.
Question, which is to bring you back to your other side,
Okay.
which has a lot to do with gender, as to whether you find there's a gendered component to perfectionism.
So I don't know this scientifically, but I would say anecdotally, absolutely, right? The imposter syndrome among women, I think, is particularly high. so I do think, well, okay, so I go back and forth on this, right? Because I would say 5 years ago, I would have told you that women feel this much more acutely than men. And I would tell you this imposter syndrome, and I would tell you that, like, my friends and I, all of whom are, by any measure successful, right? We're all, there's this part of all of us who we're still waiting to be found out, right? Where I'm not actually, and I found myself saying this a lot. I would say, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I work really hard, right? And that's like imposter syndrome to a T, right? Like someone will figure me out if I'm not the hardest worker in the room. And so I would have said that, 5, 6 years ago, that it was very gendered. And I think with our generation, it probably still is a bit gendered. But as someone who's now raising 2 boys of my own, I see it so much more in my boys, and particularly my 9-year-old. The same things. I just think that it gets sort of, it manifests differently, right? So I think I think the expectations that we put on men and women, and particularly boys and girls, are really different, and it manifests in a way that boys they face a different, still to this day, they face a different burden of being responsible for supporting a family or supporting others in a way without showing emotion while doing so, right? And I see the messages my boys are getting, right? And so I think this idea of perfection is different, right? I think a lot of women would say to you, well, perfection is, well, I have a job and my kids are alive and my house is clean and my roots aren't showing, or whatever. And I think, and these are broad generalizations, obviously. But I think for men it manifests in a different way. So I think this imposter syndrome and the way it manifests tends to be more of a sort of female thing. But I actually read a study, because I was researching, that said that it actually is showing up, if we sort of accept the existence of the imposter syndrome, it's showing up in equal measures with men in the last 5-10 years. So I think it just manifests differently. Yeah.
A wise question was asked about what we can do on this campus in terms of the messaging that we send, whether it's on the buses or whether it's on classes, about you really are supposed to be good enough to get into a whole packet of gold stars, not just one.
Right.
If you think about technology for a moment, one of the things we know is happening as a result of things such as Facebook, and Facebook's just the biggest in social networking systems, is that you develop a real sense of inferiority by seeing how good looking, doesn't matter what the gender is, how successful, how much fun everybody else is having. Yeah. And there's studies that show, for example, that the more time you spend on Facebook, sometimes the worse self-image you have. So we have, our students have this double whammy.
Oh, yeah.
They have the university's expectation structure, which may be coupled with their parents, which then becomes theirs for personal, academic, career success. And then there's the notion of personal fun, how do I look, that is it's not every day, it's probably 45 times a day being challenged by their technologies. Yeah. So what kind of messaging institutionally can we do to help them on that score?
Get off Facebook. No. I mean, you're entirely correct. Because and think about what we post on Facebook, right? I mean, the students aren't on Facebook as much as we are. They're doing other things now, right? They're tweeting and Snapchatting and doing all those. But it's not like I'm posting my failures on Facebook. No, none of us are, right? And I think there's a parallel. In sort of how we teach and how we interact with students, right? Because we're modeling. We are always modeling for them, whether we want to be or not. So if we're only telling them our sort of Facebook story and our Facebook side, right? That's what they see and that's what they think. And that you should unfriend the people on Facebook who are too far field, right? But
Last semester I gave a talk on mindfulness to a classroom, and we talked about taking Facebook breaks and social media breaks. And all of the students, not all of them, a lot of the students were really receptive to the idea
I
of
bet.
taking a break, and they felt like that would be really healthy, except they all said that in their classrooms, they're required sometimes to post on social media. And so taking that break
Yeah.
isn't actually an option for them, even if deep down they really do want to take it.
And need it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
I have a solution for that I do. I have a personal Facebook and a work Facebook. And so like for my classroom stuff, it's like on my work Facebook. So they could have like their Gmail Facebook and then their AU address Facebook that's just for those class things, the academic, and then they can temper their time with the social.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually good.
Multiple lives.
There's work being done by Greg Walton and others in psychology about belongingness that is targeted towards people who feel that if they don't belong in college, particularly early on.
Yeah.
The idea is to present stories and stats and then have write about what went true that, boy, freshman year sucked.
Yeah.
But there were these changes so that people start to realize this is college. You figure it out gets better. When you struggle, it isn't a sign that actually you don't belong because you've got the imposter syndrome.
Yep.
I've seen this done at a couple of colleges in a couple of ways successfully. I tried it here with what would be the sophomore class. The data don't look as promising. It's not clear that it had the effect. I've heard from another college, a smaller place, it not working as well. But maybe there's some way, again, of doing the equivalent of sharing on Facebook. Facebook, the failures with the trajectory of things from there.
Yeah, well, and some of you have heard me say this in other fora, but I think we need to be putting, we put the best of the best out at Eagle Summits or at orientations or recruiting events. Like we put our top achieving students, and there's real value to that. But we also need to spend some time, putting up our B- students who are doing just fine, right? And they're happy and they're sleeping 8 hours a night and they're doing an internship their junior year like they should be, right? I mean, so there's value to, we talk a lot about having role models that look like us, right? Students need that, not just in terms of diversity issues and stuff, but in terms of what they're achieving, because the students we put up in front of them is what they think our expectations are, right? If I put up the straight A student who's in 17 clubs and has 2 majors and a minor, we are communicating, whether we mean to or not, this is what we expect. This is how we define success, right? Rather than recognizing there could be success defined in a multitude of ways, right? That's one type of success, to be sure. One of the things I've started doing in SPA, we send out letters every semester to the students who made Dean's List. And I've started sending out letters to students who are B+ students, and just writing letters saying, you're doing great, keep it up. And I've been amazed because I don't get a single call from a parent about a Dean's List letter, but I have gotten so many calls from parents whose students got the B+ letter saying, I can't tell you how much this meant to us that you recognize that my son is working really hard and doing just fine. And it was really, and it was one of these things that it was sort of on a whim and at the suggestion of the academic advisors in SPA, and we did it, and it's one of the things that it's a small thing, but it sort of highlights the expectations we create by the things that we praise, right? The students we put out there. So we need to find ways to praise the students who are taking chances and making mistakes and picking themselves back up, right? My favorite letter to write is the students who get off probation, right? They're on academic probation, right? I'm sure, Patrick, you feel the same way, right? I mean, that letter is awesome. Having that meeting with a student is awesome, and there need to be ways to celebrate that. Other than like, okay, you're no longer on probation, don't screw up again, right? Like there needs to be a recognition of like, you turn things around. Like you're allowed to stumble, you're allowed to fail, and we'll be here to help you get back.
I guess, and this is pulling from Patrick's talk as well, is I think we also need to work on coupling success with mistakes, and that when you make a mistake, you find yourself more, and then you are successful. And you talked about, you made this 180 career change, you made this 180 from total research focus to really interested in teaching, and have both found success there. And it's funny because when you talk about they need people to look up to that haven't done the traditional path, but then we always hear, well, this person who's a billionaire never finished college, and
Right.
they thought it wasn't,
Right,
you know.
right.
And you're like, okay.
Right.
So they have these models, and we know that nothing great gets accomplished by doing safe things. I
Right,
mean,
right.
one of my best professors started this semester by saying, you're all getting A's, and it's on you to learn something. Like, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Do this for you. And I worked so hard in that class because it was truly about learning. So I think, and also made a lot of mistakes because you felt willing to do that. So I don't know. I just am wondering how we can help them couple those two things together, that actually mistakes lead to success rather than like these are polar opposite.
Yeah.
And telling them, don't worry that much about success. And mistakes are great.
Yeah.
You know, that's not feeling, I don't know.
Yeah, but like let's also be honest, right? Because like me telling a story about like, oh, I had this great career and I have another great career, right? Like that's not a mistake. Or like Patrick, who like, you know, moves from being a prolific scholar to a still prolific scholar and teaching all the time. Like, I mean, it's not a mistake, right? So I think we need to be, it's taking a chance, absolutely, right? And it's doing something not safe. But I mean, when do we actually share mistakes with students, right? I don't. Right? Yeah.
The advisors do.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, good.
So I would say my greatest connections with students are when I share my
Yeah,
failures
yeah.
and they're going through something.
Yeah.
And I mean, just last week I had a student who is probably getting a D, and we talked about when I got an F in college, and he was like, "You did?"
Yeah. And you're still a functioning adult? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, "I have a master's degree."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh." Then he stood up and left my office and was like, "Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
was exactly what I needed to hear."
And we need to be,
And so
yeah.
it's okay to share those failures
Yep.
with them, and share those mistakes.
Yep.
I told him why I got the F, and he was like, "Oh, gosh," you know, like they want to feel that connection and know that the person right in front of them. Yes, we hear about these billionaires, but they don't talk to that billionaire.
Right.
They're not hearing that story, but they
That's right.
are talking to us. And so if we're willing to share
That's right.
those failures and mistakes, they
Yeah.
can see that,
Yeah.
okay, this person's right in front of
Yeah.
me who has a job that they really enjoy
Yeah.
and did eventually
Yeah.
succeed. It's okay to make those mistakes
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah. And the real mistakes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, the thing I was going to say is that for me, I'm actually often very hopeful with our students, because one of the things that I actually see on a routine level, our students are willing to be very vulnerable. They're willing to be very vulnerable when they have a relationship with someone that they really feel that they have a trusting relationship, and that as a result of that, they're not going to be judged, right? So it's one thing when I'm in the classroom and that grade is there, but it's another thing when I'm in an office hour with a student and we're having that conversation around vulnerabilities, where a whole host of things then sort of in many ways sort of come up in a way that I think is healthy. I think the part that is challenging is I don't see that as much with the adults.
Yeah.
And the students see that all the time.
Yep.
I mean, the number of times where students will say to me, you know what, I can be at that place, but I don't see that role model from adults in ways, certainly not in an institution setting, or certainly it wouldn't happen in a workplace.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that we need to create, is sort of create more spaces for where the vulnerability is normalized. And I don't think because students don't see that, then there's something that must be wrong with me, unless I have a trusting relationship with you who will not judge me.
Right.
So that's the part that I'm seeing more and more from our students, and they're really yearning for that.
Yeah.
We're yearning for those spaces when they can actually go there and feel that it's okay to go there.
And it's okay to know that you need to be affirmed.
Yeah.
I mean, when I tell students I need affirmation, I need all kinds of affirmation. All the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I need conscious affirmation.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, it's okay.
Don't we all? But yeah. Yeah.
I need Gail's affirmation.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're kind of surprised. I do. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And they need to know it's okay to be, you need to.
Right.
Huh? Yonder on it. But we do, I think it's okay for them to know that they do. It's a human, we
Yeah.
have ego needs.
Yes.
It's okay, it's all right.
Right.
And just go with it. And they need affirmation,
Yeah.
lots of affirmation.
That's right.
I apologize, this isn't terribly well formed, but there's something about.
It's imperfect.
Yes. No, it's sort of a work in progress. But when you were talking about making mistakes and then career choices and going from here, I mean, I started out as a Russian language major. I was a lawyer, and now I do this, right? So that looks either like 2 serious mistakes that I made prior to getting to the thing I was supposed to, or a meandering path.
Right.
And the thing is, I've had a lot of people say to me, when they found out I was a practicing lawyer, they'd say, oh, so do you regret going to law school? And I can't answer that question because I don't know how that other Mark Schaefer's life turned out.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe in some parallel universe, there's a really, happy, gardener somewhere with my name. I don't know. But the other thing is, it strikes me that it's all a question of perspective. When I look back on something, it has a very different look than if you told me at 18 that I was going to pick this and then make and then go that way and then go that way.
That's right.
And so I'm not sure we can impart that experience other than to sort of go with it.
Yeah.
It's there was a Star Trek episode where they talked about your life as a tapestry.
Yeah.
Right, and when you pull on one of the threads, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
And so I can't regret anything that I went through because I don't know the person that didn't do that.
Right.
But
That's what Nietzsche called Amor Fati. Love your fate.
Right, love your fate. But the only way I know that is because I went through it,
Right.
and they haven't done that yet.
Right.
So I feel like that's the tension is.
Yeah.
You don't want to diminish the negative experience that they're having, but the
That's
only
right.
way to overcome that is
That's
to
right.
ride through it.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
can I point it to the elephant that's not in the middle of the room? There aren't any students here.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
Why aren't there lots of students here? Because it's Wednesday at 4 o'clock, they're all downtown, right? So, and where are most of the faculty? Most of the faculty are cubby-holed away in their offices working on their next high-impact research publication. There are structural factors here, organizational factors that produce positive disincentives for the nurturing environment that we all agree in principle we should be providing for the students. One hand and the other. At some point, somebody's got to actually steer the ship in one direction rather than 2 directions.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you just have a lot of cracks and a lot of people falling through.
Yeah. Andrea's doing that. She's fixing it. but yeah, point taken.
More mindfulness Mondays for leadership.
Agreed.
Yeah.
There's our plug, Mindful Mondays, 4 p.m.
Last one is on the last day of class.
Okay, well, I think we're at time. So thank you.
Thank you.